The day they promoted her instead of me, my boss shook my hand and told me the decision had been incredibly difficult. He said it with the practiced sincerity of someone who had rehearsed it, who had stood in front of a mirror that morning and worked out exactly how much eye contact made a lie feel like consideration. I thanked him. I told him I understood. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my chair, and spent the next 4 hours doing my job with the particular focus of someone who has just realized that everything they believed about where they stood was built on a foundation that other people had been quietly hollowing out for months. My name is Rachel Connors. I was 31 years old and a senior data analyst at a mid-sized logistics firm in Minneapolis when I discovered that the woman I had mentored, defended, and covered for during the worst 6 months of her professional life had been methodically stealing my work, my relationships, and my future, and that she had done it so carefully, so patiently, so completely, that by the time I understood what had happened, almost everyone around me had already been convinced that the version of me she had constructed was the real one. I want to tell you how it started, because the start matters. The start is always where the blueprint is. Her name was Dana Whitfield. She joined our team in February, transferred from the Atlanta office, with a reputation for being ambitious and a smile that arrived slightly before the rest of her face, the kind of smile that made you feel chosen when it landed on you. I was assigned as her unofficial mentor, which was not a formal title, but was understood in our office the way many things were understood, implicitly, without being written anywhere, in that space between what companies say they value and what they actually reward. I did not mind. I was good at my work and comfortable enough in my position that helping someone newer felt generous rather than threatening. That comfort, I would later understand, was the very thing she had counted on. She asked good questions. That was the first thing I noticed about her, the thing that made me trust her faster than I should have. Not the generic questions of someone performing curiosity, but specific ones, detailed ones, the kind that told you she had already done the reading and was now trying to understand something underneath it. She asked about the Henderson account, which I had managed for 2 years and considered something close to my professional signature. She asked how I had restructured their routing data in the 3rd quarter of the previous year, the restructuring that had saved them an estimated $400,000 and earned me the only standing ovation I have ever received in a conference room. I told her everything. I told her because she asked well, and because I was proud of it, and because nothing in the architecture of that conversation suggested I was being studied. By April, she had started attending my client meetings. This was presented as part of her onboarding, a way of accelerating her learning curve, and I supported it because that was the kind of team player I had spent 6 years becoming. She sat beside me and took careful notes and said very little, and afterward she would ask me questions about the decisions I had made in the room, why I had framed a particular problem one way and not another, how I had read the client's hesitation before they voiced it, what I was thinking when I chose to push back on a specific number. I answered all of it. I remember thinking, more than once, that she was one of the most genuinely curious people I had worked with. The curiosity, it turned out, had a destination. The first thing I noticed, though I did not name it correctly at the time, was a shift in how our director talked about the Henderson account. Small things. He started referring to a presentation Dana had apparently put together, a summary of the Q3 strategy, and complimenting its clarity. I had not seen this presentation. When I asked Dana about it, she said it was just something she had pulled together from her notes from our meetings, something informal. She had not thought it was worth mentioning. She seemed slightly embarrassed, which I mistook for humility. I told her it was fine. I meant it. I was still operating inside the assumption that we were on the same side. By June, the shift had become a pattern. Our director was asking Dana to join calls that I would normally have led. Her name was appearing in email threads where previously only mine had been. In a team meeting, someone referred to the Henderson restructuring as something Dana had been instrumental in, and I watched it happen in real time. The small, confident nod she gave, the way she did not correct it, the way she let the credit settle over her like something she had simply forgotten to decline. I said something. I said, as neutrally as I could manage, that the restructuring had been a project I had led before Dana joined the team. There was a pause. Dana smiled at me with something that looked exactly like warmth and said, of course, that she had learned everything from watching me, that she hoped she had captured even a fraction of my approach. Everyone in the room seemed moved by this. I sat back down and understood for the first time that I was not in a competition I had chosen to enter. I went home that evening and sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. I went back through 6 months of interactions with the particular attention of someone who is looking for a pattern they missed the first time. And what I found was not subtle once I knew what I was looking at. The questions she had asked me in the beginning were not curiosity, they were research. The notes she had taken in client meetings were not for her learning, they were for her portfolio. Every time I had explained my thinking, every time I had walked her through a decision, every time I had been generous with the internal logic of how I worked, I had been handing her a piece of something she was quietly building under my name with her face on it. I did not confront her. I want to be honest about why. It was not only strategy, though strategy was part of it. It was also that I needed to be certain, and being certain required watching, and watching required patience I was not sure I had, but found anyway because the alternative was doing something loud and visible that she could use against me. Because I had already begun to understand something important about Dana Whitfield. She did not make mistakes. She made situations, and in every situation she created, she was already positioned to be the reasonable one. So I watched. I started keeping records, emails, timestamps, meeting notes with her comments documented alongside mine, a quiet parallel archive of what had actually happened and when. I started asking questions in team meetings that could only be answered correctly by someone who had done the original work, framed as collaborative curiosity, the same tool she had used on me. I watched her answer and noted the moments where the specificity ran out, where she reached the edge of what she had borrowed, and the answers became general, became approximate, became answers of someone who understood the surface of a thing, but not its foundation. And I found the email in August. It was not in my inbox. It was forwarded to me by accident by a colleague named Priya, who had meant to forward something else and sent me the wrong thread, and immediately sent a second message saying, "Ignore that," which was the most reliable way to ensure I would not. The thread was between Dana and our director, going back 4 months. In it, Dana had been providing regular updates on the Henderson account, framed as her own analysis, her own recommendations, referencing conversations she had apparently been having with the client directly. She had not been having those conversations directly. I had been having those conversations. She had been in the room, but I had been leading, and somewhere between the room and the email thread, the attribution had been quietly reassigned. At the bottom of the thread, in a message from 6 weeks earlier, our director had written that he was increasingly impressed with her grasp of complex accounts and that he thought she might be ready for more responsibility. Dana had replied with 2 sentences that I have since memorized. She wrote, "Rachel has been a wonderful resource and I've learned so much from her support role. I think I'm ready to take point on some of these relationships going forward." Support role. I read those 2 words in my car in the parking garage at 7:45 in the morning, sitting very still, the engine running, the air conditioning blowing cold air at my face. I had given 6 years to that company. I had built the Henderson account from a mid-peer relationship into our highest value contract. I had trained her for 4 months with the open-handedness of someone who believed that helping others succeed was part of what success meant. And in a private email thread that I was never supposed to see, I had been quietly reclassified as a resource, as support, as the person who had helped her get ready for the opportunities that were, by clear implication, no longer meant for me. I forwarded the email to my personal account. Then I sat in my car for another 10 minutes and made a decision about what kind of person I was going to be in what came next. Not the easy version of myself, the accommodating version, the version that had gotten me into this particular room. A different version, the version that had built the Henderson account in the first place, methodical, precise, willing to work a long timeline when the situation required it. I requested a meeting with our director the following week, not about the promotion, which had not yet been officially announced but which I had heard enough to understand was already decided, about the Henderson account. I told him I wanted to do a full strategic review before the end of the quarter, something comprehensive that documented the history of the relationship and the specific decisions that had shaped it. He agreed, pleased, said it was exactly the kind of proactive thinking that made me valuable. I scheduled the review for 3 weeks out and spent those 3 weeks building the most detailed account history I had ever assembled. Every decision, every email, every meeting note, every data model, time-stamped and sourced, a complete record of 6 years of work that made authorship impossible to argue with. I also had a conversation with the Henderson client directly. His name was Tom, and I had known him for 2 years, and he trusted me in the specific way that clients trust people who have consistently been right about things that mattered to them. I told him I was doing a full documentation project and asked if he would be willing to speak to our leadership briefly about the history of our work together, specifically the restructuring project. He said, of course. He said he had been meaning to say something about that anyway, that he had noticed some confusion in recent conversations about who had been leading his account. The review meeting was on a Thursday. Dane was in the room. Our director was in the room. 2 members of senior leadership were in the room because I had quietly suggested, through our director, that given the scope of the Henderson relationship, it might be worth having more of the team present. Tom joined by video call for the first 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, he said clearly, specifically, and with the particular authority of a client who represents 12% of company revenue, that his relationship with the firm had been built on his work with me, that the strategic approach that had reshaped his logistics costs had come from me, and that he wanted to make sure, as the firm continued to grow, that the people responsible for his account were the people who actually understood it. He thanked Dane for her energy and said she seemed very capable. Then he said goodbye, and the video call ended, and the room was quiet. I did not look at Dane. I had learned that from watching her. I kept my eyes on our director and let the silence do what it needed to do. The promotion announcement came 3 weeks later, and it was mine. Our director called it a straightforward decision. Dane resigned 4 months after that, which I learned in a 2-sentence email from HR, and I have not spoken to her since the Thursday of the review meeting, when she stopped by my desk on her way out and told me with a smile that finally showed me its real shape that I had played this better than she expected. I told her I had not been playing. She tilted her head slightly, like she was not sure whether to believe me, and then she left. I have thought about that moment many times since, about whether she was right, whether what I did was playing, or whether it was simply refusing to lose something that was mine by doing nothing while someone took it. I'm not still entirely sure where that line is. I'm not sure it matters. What I know is that I went back to my desk after she left and opened my laptop and got back to work, because the Henderson account still needed attention and the fourth quarter projections were not going to build themselves. And somewhere in the specific satisfaction of that ordinary moment, I found something that felt cautiously and without performance like winning.
Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs an audience, the kind that is still there when the room is empty and the day is over and you are exactly where you decided to be.